Hi, thank you.
Who is
All
that
right.
man?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for your patience. You know, we have practiced this and okay, anyway, how is everyone? How's everyone doing? In the room, we know. How are you doing at home? Good. Okay. Good to see you. Good to see everyone. And if you feel comfortable, we would love to see your faces. I understand sometimes I have been there myself, where it's nice to learn and not have to think about anything else that you're doing. So I'm looking around. I think those in the room who were here last week and many of you, though not all of you, who were on Zoom were here last week. Just raise your hand if you were here last week. Okay. For those of you for whom Buber is a new topic, I'm happy at another time to give you a little bit of a recap. But given our time, I was hoping that we could dig right in and really only recap what is most critical for now, which is Martin Buber's theory of I, it, and I, thou. So let me just start before we get into our first PowerPoint. Tell me, for those who remember, what do you recall in just quick bullet points about who and how Martin Buber approached his thinking? Anything, just throw out anything you remember.
So there were two different types of relationships. The I, it is more transactional, and the I, thou is kind of more encompassing, I think.
And what's the distinction? Someone give her a hand. She's got the fundamentals for it. What else do you remember from that? What's I, it characterized by?
Utility. Isn't it separate parts or something? Not looking at the whole.
Yeah, in particular, separate parts in terms of how you relate to them for what?
For utilities purposes.
For utility, right? It's a very utilitarian kind of functional response that you have, right? I, it is how I get something, benefit from something, experience something directly as a result of who the other is, right? Right? There's something, as you have said, that's transactional. Yeah. Anything else that we're missing so far? Just kind of in a quick recap of I, thou. I, it. This is just in the I, it description. Anything else? Okay. I, thou. What do you remember from I, thou? Come on, that's the juicy one. What do you remember from I, thou?
It's more interpersonal. That's getting to know a person on like even beyond an intimate level. It's sort of like identities disappear and you get to know them on deeper terms.
Right. So yes, Marie, you said, and Stacy in the room just said it's on a much more personal, intimate level. One thing you said, Marie, was interesting, right? It's not that your identity, in fact, Buber taught very clearly that your identity, not only does it not disappear, but it is fully who you are. There isn't anything that you stop being or having or are. And the other person in relationship relates directly to you in your fullness. That is the awe of it all, right? That both parties in an I, thou relationship don't give up anything or change anything in their identity. They are wholly, with a W, wholly who they are, and in relationship to one another. There's no need, right? That there's nothing transactional. It's only relational. Gail actually helped us with that last week. It was a great description, right? These two relations happen wholly, with each party being who they are, right? Right? Does that sound familiar? Yes, no, maybe? Okay.
Yes.
Anything else at all that you're remembering? What else stuck in your head? Yeah.
One of the things I remembered was that once you even talk about the I-thou relationship, it's not there anymore.
Like smoke, it vanishes, right? As soon right. Buber called it the ineffable relationship. right? As soon as we try to give, kind of like God, right? As soon as we try to give description to an I thou encounter, it is gone, right? Because we have moved into critical thinking and not encountering, right? Right, that's what Buber taught. Yes. Anything else at all?
He said neither is superior to the other.
Interesting, right? Right, that both I, it on the one hand and I, thou on the other. And maybe we ought not to talk about them from one hand to the other, right? But each of those, right, has its own inherent value and worth. Where do we spend the bulk of our time? In which of the two?
I-it.
In the I-it relationship, right? Or encounter, right? Right. And not that we strive to be living only in I thou encounters, because we can't, right? We can't fully live in that space, but that we notice, right? It is much more in a mindful kind of way. We notice when we are in either, right? There is an awareness after the fact, as Bob just said, not during the fact, in an I thou encounter, right? As soon as you know that you're in it, or try to give meaning to it, or shape to it, or anything to it, you've removed yourself from it, right? Okay. Anything else at all? Let me just, anything else at all before I screen share and can't see you? Okay, so when I screen share, I can't see you. So you got to just unmute. If you've got something, friends in the class don't have to unmute. They are already in that space. But please just unmute yourself and just talk when you need, okay? Or want.
Which would be beautiful.
You can see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So Martin Buber, here we are going to talk about mutuality and duality. This is for you, I would imagine, very small. But I wonder if somebody could read this, because I think for sure, I don't know if my friends in here can see it. See that? Probably not. But I wonder if somebody from home could read that aloud for us.
One of Buber's major concerns, can you hear me?
Correct? Yep. Thank you.
One of Buber's major concerns was how to discover true reality. Because of the limits of human perception, we're often misled by appearances. But what is the thing in itself? For example, when we look at a person and observe his or her bodily features, we take note of eye color, the shape of the face, contours of the body. But who is the real person, the identity behind the perception? This we often fail to capture. Following the German philosopher Kant, Buber argued that we cannot know any object or person in itself apart from its relation to us. In Buber's view, perfect knowledge can only be obtained by means of dialogue, possible only through a real encounter. This constitutes the basic imperative of life.
Thank you. Thank you. And Peter, welcome. Welcome. We're glad to have you studying with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so does this, it falls in line, I hope. Are you following along with, okay, good. Does this fall in line so far with what we have understood? Any questions or thoughts before we move into the next area? This is part of the recap, right? Part of that idea that this is the result of the meeting, right? That and Buber's affirmation that the interpersonal is more significant than the purely individual or broken into its parts kind of interaction, which is actually, in fact, in line with traditional Judaism, right? That we look at both the whole and the interpersonal, not the individual, right? There's nowhere in Judaism that we are taught that we should go to a mountaintop and be in seclusion and either meditate or study or pray, right? Judaism says and teaches and espouses with great meaning the importance of balancing the individual and the communal. but that ultimately it is the communal and the interpersonal where all is realized, right? This is really the foundational for Buber's teaching, okay? So this is I, thou. We just had this conversation, need not go through it again, right? I, it, and I, thou, I, it. You correctly noted, I, thou, you correctly noted. Right, I think we checked off all of these boxes, right? More common in our day-to-day relationships, right? That there is, I think, Marie, one piece that we missed was this idea that there is, in fact, a conscious distance between us and the other person, right? The person who is providing some kind of service or something that is transactional, right? Right? And that the distance isn't just a physical distance between us, but an understood spiritual distance between us, emotional distance, mystical distance even in between us, right? And again, as you mentioned, right, it's neither good nor bad. I, thou, I think you checked off all of those boxes. If you want to just take a quick look and see if we missed anything. The very last line, right, comes directly from Martin Buber's work, I and Thou, right? Which is every thou in the world is by its nature fated to become a thing. We read this last week, or continually to re-enter into the condition of things, right? So the natural cycle is that we spend far more time being in I-it relationships, encounters, than we could ever imagine being in I-thou, and that the kind of continuum, or maybe the circular nature, is that we move from largely I-it relations to I-thou relations. So far, so good? Okay, so some questions came up last week, and again, since we have studied in the week in between, about what Buber, who was Buber? Not the biographical information that I shared with you last week, but was he a religious guy, right? Was he a Shomer Shabbos guy? Was he someone who was observant of the commandments? So let's just talk for a second about, this is Eugene Borowitz, who was a prominent teacher and theologian and professor and rabbi, for many of us, one of our most terrifying professors at seminary. But also genius. And in his book, Choices in Modern Jewish Thought, he wrote, a religiosity that can obscure one's responsibility to one's neighbors is uncongenial to the Jewish spirit. In stressing engagement rather than solitariness, Buber affirmed the Jewish heritage in a new existential way. Buber directs our attention to the inner life of personal relationships. So tell me, how do you understand that? What do you think? What do you think? If you had to imagine, or perhaps kind of who Buber was religiously, what would you say might be Buber's religious life? What did it look like? Do you think?
Well, it sounds Hasidic almost, because isn't that more worshiping in a group and worshiping with joy, as opposed to, as you say, being solitary on the mountaintop?
Yes. So the worship part, right? That's the worship part. What else? What else do you think?
Sounds to me like, aside from worshiping together, it has to do with forming relationships, perhaps community building among the congregation.
Yeah. What else?
It also looks like it's more expansive. It's not just among Jews, but would probably include everybody. There's
Interesting, right? So who was Buber talking to, right? Who was this teaching for? What was it for, right? We know where he lived. We know where he continued to study and write, right? And we know that what he was preaching and teaching, preaching with a little p, was that meaning arises from what transpires between people, and the importance of knowing a person versus knowing an idea, right? Or a prayer structure, right? That life is dynamic, right? Is what he taught. And that it's people, not necessarily ideas in isolation, right? He would not have called himself, I talked about this last week too, he would not have called himself a philosopher, right? And he would have said, and did in fact say, that the rubrics of prayer as we know them, the rigors of prayer, what's called the keva, the structure of prayer. So prayer is made up of keva, which is, we go from this prayer to this prayer to this prayer. We bend, we bow, that's called the keva, the structure. It lies in balance with the kavanah, your intention behind your prayers, right? So he would say prayer, right? Prayer was not meant to be a form of slavery. It's meant to be covenant, right? Covenantal, right? A brit, a covenant between us and God, and then a broader experience among the community members, right?
I have a sneaking suspicion that Buber would have gotten along very well with Ron Wolfson.
Right? Who? Go ahead, Liz. Who taught what? Who teaches what?
It is about relational Judaism. That's what he talks about. That's where the focus is.
Right. That right. Like not transactional, but relational, right? Which is a drumbeat that we hear steadily, right? Okay, so let's look for a second. And any other comments before we go on to this next slide?
What does he consider a community? I mean, he obviously didn't live in the solely Jewish community in the times he lived. Does he consider the community the Jewish community or the entire community that he lived in?
It's an excellent, right? Yeah, it's an excellent question, right? And somebody else who's on in the class tonight asked to whom was he really teaching, right? So we didn't get to this, and we're going to get to this when we in sessions 3 and 4. So it's a bit of a teaser, but he was not necessarily warmly or widely received within the Jewish community. There were many who thought he was heretical in his teaching, and in fact, he has much more resonance in the non-Jewish community, and especially in the Protestant community. People like Buber, right, who love his work, and many more who took umbrage with his framing, because he was pitching something altogether different, right? So the question of, to whom was Buber not so much speaking, but who was he addressing, and who were his teachings for, remains a question, because he gained much more traction in the non-Jewish world than he did the Jewish world. Though we know him well, right? You know his name, even if you don't necessarily know what he taught, right? So we're going to look at a couple of kind of his categories in general. Everybody can hear okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead, please, Arlene. Oh, did you want to say something? No? Okay.
No. Just listening.
Okay, good. Nice to see you. So right in line with what we would understand Buber to say, right? We come to know God as we come to know people, right? And that many of our traditional philosophers talk about relationship with God in terms of an I-it relationship or an I-it encounter, right? As if God were the thing, the entity, the whatever you want to call the deity, right? From whom we need something, right? You fill in the blank, right? Think of any of our prayers. Tell me any concept you know from any of our prayers, any theme from any of our prayers. Tell me any one theme.
Praising God.
Praising God, right? A God who needs praise, right? And why are we supposed to praise God? Aha, okay. Why are we supposed to, go ahead.
Because God is above us. We praise
Say again,
God.
Eileen?
Because God is above who we are.
Right, because God is more, right? God might be seen as the one in charge, right? In terms of providence and what's going to be, what's predetermined, right? Gil, what were you going to say?
I said that's what we're taught.
Right. So Gil just said, because that's what we're taught, right? It's like that story about like the roast, right? Or the tongue, right? And cutting off the tip of it, right? That right whole thing, right? That's what generations have always, taught us, right? This is the way we pray. Right? God needs praise, right? But why does God need praise?
Because it's petitionary. We're like trying to get on God's good side.
Right, because it says so God looks at us favorably.
Right. So petitionary, because we're trying to get good on God's good side, because right. Stacey just said God's right, so that we can be looked upon favorably. Right.
But that's giving God human characteristics. In my mind, why should God care?
Okay, so Gil just said, bing, 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 but that's giving God human characteristics.
Yeah.
So what would Buber say about that?
He would say he doesn't have them. Doesn't. The idea is just for you to be there. And if you're there, somehow you get a feeling or something by being there, and not worrying about what God is, who he is, how they act or she acts or anything. It has no place in this time.
Right. Can you hear any of that or no?
Yes.
So, kind of.
Okay, right, so God, I won't do this justice, but God's, Gil, Freudian, right? Gil just said, right, that is attributing human characteristics to God, right? And actually detracting from the experience of God and just being in the fullness of God, right? And not needing something from God, right? What else, did I miss anything, Gil?
But,
No, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Go ahead, Marlene. Thank you.
well, my problem with saying that God needs our praise was that it's not that even if God did have some personhood, it's not that he or she needs our praise. It's that because it's transactional in this instance, we're praising him because we want something from him or her.
Yeah, but that's not true.
No.
I mean, I guess that is a transactional, but I should,
I don't think so.
acting or doing things with God, is a transactional thing. I mean, if you always have to give, then God is just a gift.
Did you hear that?
No.
We can't hear that. Could you
Okay.
repeat it?
Yeah, so if the relationship with God is transactional, that means God is an it in this encounter, right? If there's something we need, yeah? If there's something we need from God, fill in the blank. Right? If there's something that we need from God, whatever it is, whether that's in our petitionary prayers or even in our hoda'ot, right? In our thankful prayers, right? Right there. And there's a difference between the two, between the requests and the thanks, right? Right? Does it de facto become an I-it relationship with God? Buber would say yes. Buber would say yes. Not just the anthropomorphizing of God, right? Not just the giving of human characteristics to God, right? Attributing them to him, but actually saying, oh God, would you please, God, help me, right? Any of those, right, are in fact no different than the relationship that we have with the Uber driver who gets us from here to there, right? I say with my tongue, you can't see through my mask, but my tongue through my cheek, and I'm sure a lightning strike above my head, right? Right? It becomes transactional, right? Right? Versus what Buber teaches, which is that we should encounter God, reach out to God as we would another person, right? In terms of their presence. And the analogy that both Borowitz and Buber use is when you are in a loving relationship and you can sit in silence with someone you love and know unequivocally that you are in a loving presence, right? And you don't need a hand touch, you don't need a hug, you don't need words between you, right? You are fully aware that you are in a loving space with this person, right? Right? That you are in an I-thou relationship encounter with God just by virtue of being in it, right? Right?
Yes.
I don't see it that way.
Aha, so not trade, right? So I-thou.
Well, I know, but even if you're looking at I-it, which you're saying is the normal.
Right.
Isn't it transactions could be going both ways?
Right. So so the question that Stacy's asking is, are I-it relationships reciprocal? Right? That's one. It could be.
Yeah.
Are I-thou encounters reciprocal? No. No. They could be, right? It just is, right? Right? Where is God? Wherever you let God in, right? Is the
Right.
teaching, right? Right?
Right.
Make sense? In an enormous kind of way. Does that make some sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go for a second. Sorry, it's so small on the big TV screen. Hopefully that you can see it, right? Let me just go back for 1 second about God. There's one piece. Buber taught that he wanted to make sure that we don't identify our encounters with God as an exceptional event, the way our biblical ancestors did, right? That we're not waiting to have an encounter with God, which is like a burning bush or a parting of the waters kind of encounter, right? And neither should we feel, you know, I have a good friend who's an evangelical Christian, and she speaks in tongues. Freaked me out the first time I heard her do that. But for her, that is a way to encounter God that she would tell you in her language is akin to an I thou moment, right? And Buber would say that is not so, right? There shouldn't be you wouldn't have you wouldn't notice a tingling or something very somatic, right? Something in your body, right? It wouldn't change how you are to the outward world to have this I thou encounter, right? And actually cautions us to not measure an I thou encounter with God or with a person by the sensation it leaves us with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, let's go on for a second about to the Torah, which is Buber's next. He goes through a whole bunch of different categories, and Torah is among them. So he wrote very clearly that we should take the Bible seriously, but not literally, which is interesting, right? That in all likelihood it was divinely inspired, but written by human hands, right? That in reading or studying the Torah, we have the opportunity to actually imagine the experience which engendered the writing down of those stories, right? Right. He firmly rejected that the giving of Torah at Sinai was a one-time revelation of the laws, right? That was like seen as, I don't mean to mix my metaphors, but apocalyptic, right, in the Jewish world, right? Right? By I thou standards, you see the Bible that best tells us how God was first fully known, right? And that gives us a kind of gauge, if you will, right, of how our early ancestors encountered God, right? And that at that moment at Sinai, that our ancestors were open and willing to have that encounter, right? We can't actually aspire to an I thou moment. We can't plan for it, rather. We can't lay groundwork for it because, as Gil said earlier, right, it's a moment, and not only divine, right, but among humans as well, that just is, right? So we can't plan for it, right? And that this moment was in fact both individual and communal, which is one that throws a bit of a monkey wrench into what many people understand Buber to be teaching, right?
Yeah.
Right? How does that work? How does that work? Any thoughts?
Is he saying that we all have a personal God? That we all have an individual relationship with God?
You said two different things. You said two different things. Unpack those. Yeah, unpack those for us.
Well, I'm Jewish, so I can do that, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, let me unpack. From what I'm getting is that we all have an individual relationship with God. We don't need a Moses to speak to God, that we have our own individual relationship with God ourselves. And we have a relationship with God also as a group, as being part of the Jewish community. So we don't need, I would assume that the way he's saying that, for us to converse with God, we don't need some sort of special spiritual leader to do that for us.
I think Buber's talking about us having a conversation with God. I think Buber is beyond that. That when you have this I thou relationship, you're not discussing anything with anybody. It's just this. I guess the best way I can describe it is that when I play golf, 99% of the time, I wouldn't hit the ball right, but every so often, I can take a swing, everything just works, and it's just this feeling. I mean, once in a lifetime, you hit the perfect shot. I think that's what Buber was saying is as you get into this relationship with God, there's no words, there's no discussion. This is completely a feeling that goes over you. But the bigger problem I have is on the final point. If I remember from Torah, God appears as a cloud. And how can we have an I thou meaning with a cloud?
Right. So could you hear all that?
No.
Okay.
I did. I heard
Okay.
it.
Okay, good. Okay, so you heard some of it, right? So among the interesting things that the many of the interesting things that Gil just shared, right? Circles back to this idea. He used a golfing metaphor, right?
Right.
Right. 99% of the time, whatever. None of us know you on the golf course. So, okay, he said, not my words, his. 99% of the time, his shots are very poor, and 1% of the time, it all comes together, right? It all comes together, and it's that perfect shot, and it's just perfect. However, is that a moment where it just is, or is that a practice moment or moment of luck, right? Is it right? Is it right? That is kind of the question that Buber might ask, right? But Gil then went on to say, how do we reconcile or how do we understand in the Torah text God appearing as any number of things? The reference that Gil used was a cloud, right? God appeared as a cloud that went with the people, right? That moved with the people, right? How do we understand a God who has that kind of a form? What do you think Buber might say to that?
I wonder if God is a cloud, would it enable more of an I thou relationship? Because there's not a body to focus on. There's just an amorphous cloud that is everywhere.
Okay, but once we notice that cloud, it
Yeah.
becomes an I it, right? It becomes an I it encounter, right? As soon as we know the shade of the cloud, right? As soon as we break it into its individual parts, right? Right? To have the experience that God is with you, right? It's an individual moment, right? Now, maybe it's an individual moment in a collective, right? That's the piece that's hard to tease out for many of us, right? Right. But if you have this experience with the cloud, right? This moment of presence with the cloud, that perhaps might be right an I thou encounter. Does that make sense? Right. So people assume, right, that if they take the Bible literally, they'll hear a voice, they'll see a cloud, they'll whatever. And to them, dialogue, right, this encounter with God means something verbal or something visual. Right? Right? And that we shouldn't actually wait for that. Right? We have this text which offers us this maybe, right? This is how it shook out. But Buber's saying that was then, and that was probably written by human hands, written down by human hands. We're at that next place now where we don't have the opportunity to encounter God like that, right? So what is it, right, that we should await? And Buber says God's presence, right? And that moment, right? Right? Does that make sense? Any questions so far on Torah? We got another slide on Torah. So this comes to us on, it's a great source from the Jewish Virtual Library on Martin Buber, who wrote, "We must come without precondition, without expectation, because that would already attempt to limit our relationship partner, God, and thus create an I-it moment," right? That's what we're talking about. If we try to analyze the text, the Torah text, we again create an I-it relationship, because analysis places ourselves outside of the dialogue as an observer and not as a total participant. So my head went, when I read that quote, my head went right to Torah study, right? Like what are we doing every week in Torah study, right? What are we doing? What are we doing? Right? We're analyzing, right? We're analyzing, we're picking it apart. We're any time you've done Torah study, right? We pick it apart for and then at the end, right, we've kind of grown this custom for those who are in Torah study to share a Devar Torah at the end, right? What would you teach off of this text, right? And maybe in those moments, I was trying to think about it. Maybe in those moments, it's how we experience that slice of the story. Maybe maybe it's a stretch. I don't know. I don't know. But interesting, right? So how do we understand, and how did Buber understand Torah? Right? Not for the breaking down into its teeny tiny parts where there's an extra aleph or an extra hey or a patach or a kamatz or why we read it this way or right. But when we break it down like that, we are in fact doing it and our encounter with it a disservice. Let's go on. Yeah, go ahead.
It seems like anytime you try to put these encounters into words, you are turning it into an I-its relationship.
Absolutely.
When you just experience it and don't try to describe it, then it remains an I-thou.
Right.
Putting things into words, because words are so limiting, they put it all into a box.
Right. Oftentimes, how people when first learning to process poetry or music or art, say, let it do what it's going to do to you. Right? Don't describe it. Don't analyze it. Just let it be. Right? Just let it be.
Right. Or let it resonate.
Right. Let it resonate. Right. Let it kind of distill. Right. Let it distill. Would someone like to read this creation slide?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How would Buber say that we should interact with the Torah? If we're not, if he was disfavoring the Torah study, kind of like what we do, what should we be doing on, say, Saturday morning?
Who wants to answer? Who wants to answer? And it is in fact happening on Saturday mornings. Who wants to answer? What would Buber have taught about the merits of Torah study? He probably wouldn't have used the word merit, by the way. But what might he have thought about gathering for Torah study?
Is it like forming relationships? So it's a forming of relationships.
It is only as worthwhile as it impacts, right? He wouldn't have used the word impacts, but it has some sort of dynamic, interpersonal ripple, right? Don't get caught up in the text, the minutia of the text itself.
So are you saying that he meaning Buber would say that Torah should only be studied with other people?
Yes, actually, in fact, that is in keeping with most Jewish teachings, that we are not meant to study on our own, right? That's where the concept of chevruta comes from, studying in partnership. That we can study periodically on our own, but that in fact, right, many of our greatest teachers say that the divine presence rests between two when they are studying Torah. Right, that is what, right, which Buber would have something else to say about that, right? But yes, that it is. Yeah, go ahead.
I think what he would say, though, is if I am studying Torah by myself, I am studying it with another person. I'm studying it with the author. I'm studying it with the, if we're reading about David and Bathsheba, I'm studying it with David and Bathsheba.
Keith, how do you come to that?
Well, this, I think he may be saying that Torah offers itself or God offers himself through Torah as a real encounter with a real being. And so it's not necessary that I studied the Torah with a whole group of other people necessarily, although it doesn't preclude that. But that I relate to the Torah as I would another person. And
Friends, what do you think?
Up to it.
What do you think? I see faces and heads in this room, but I don't see you. What do you think?
I don't know. My question is, does he believe that you have to
Wait,
study
hold on, Herb, hold on 1 second. What do you think about of the concept that Keith lays out?
I think
Well, that's what
I think it's the opposite.
Yeah.
That there's little so distant as a person with a text relating to the subject of the text. To me, that's the opposite of being one with another in present time.
Okay. And Herb, were you going to say something similar?
Yeah, I don't know if he thinks you have to study Torah at all. I mean, you have an I it and I thou relationship with God on your own. So is Torah necessary, or is that just a group, something a group does together so that you can have a relationship with the group?
Right. Is it a catalyst? Is it a conduit? Is it a right?
Yes.
Let's the next, the next slides are on creation and revelation. Let's see if it unfolds any other information for us. Who might like to read this slide?
I would read it.
Thank you.
Creation is the origin, redemption the goal. But revelation is not a fixed, dated point poised between the two. The revelation at Sinai is not this midpoint itself, but the perceiving of it, and such perception is possible at any time.
Who wants to unpack that? Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. You got your check mark for reading it, not unpacking it, right?
Yeah.
How do you understand that? How do you understand that?
Seems like it didn't. Okay, so that means that the possibility for all this is ongoing and we can help create it. It wasn't necessarily a fixed point in time. If that makes sense.
100%. There's a traditional Jewish teaching that each successive generation away from Sinai is less everything, less pious, less learned, less God-centered, right? That the farther away we are from Sinai, the worse off we are, essentially, is the teaching, right? Buber says not at all. Buber says not at all that there's ongoing revelation, right? And revelation not in the way we understand it with a capital R, right? Right. So Marie, it's exactly as you say. Exactly as you say. Right?
Rabbi, could you talk about redemption as the goal?
Right. So what is that? What how do you think? But yeah, it's a great question, Marilyn. How do you think Buber would might understand redemption?
No, sorry. What is North Korea? Well, I don't think he would understand it as a traditional redemption in terms of the Messiah coming, and
right.
I think he would probably view redemption as a series of, as being able to exist more in I-thou relationships more of the time.
Right. So it's interesting, where it gets gray, right, and prickly is to discern messianic times, right, and living in a world redeemed, right, on the one hand, and I'm not setting these up as juxtapositions, but in terms of our studies of Buber, right, where does that hang with Buber's notion of I-thou, right, I-thou encounters, right, and being very forthcoming, saying we cannot exist solely in I-thou moments, right? Neither should we aspire to, right? So redemption, right, and messianic era, right, as we talk about it, is markedly different than being, right, we can't be in a perpetual state of I-thou, right?
Could you explain the word redemption?
Probably not.
Because I don't know what it means here or anywhere, really.
Right. So who can explain it traditionally? Right. Creation is the origin, redemption is the goal. Right. Who can in traditional terms? Marlene, that you get or not so much?
So redemption.
Right. How do we understand redemption?
So it's sort of like regaining your values that you've lost. Or
Right.
Right, to be, right, to be, right. So traditionally, we would say everybody living in the land of Israel, everybody being, followers of the text, right? Everybody living harmoniously in community, right? That we would be a redeemed people. That is in the broadest of brushstrokes, right? That's not what Buber would teach, right? That's not what Buber would teach, right? That isn't the aspiration, right?
Is part of it that redemption would be the fulfillment or getting closer to the fulfillment of what it's possible for a human to be, and as was said before, in more I thou
Encounters.
yeah.
With an understanding that it's not aspirational, right? But I thou encounters aren't. It's not like we're not doing well enough if we don't live in a perpetual state of ecstasy or I thou encounters, right? Like I want to be sure that we all hear that in Buber's teaching, right? He didn't have any preconceived ideas that that's where we should be, right? Or that's how we should be, right?
So Rabbi, does the I thou encounter redeem us from the I it encounters?
You tell me.
Well, is it unnecessary to be in I thou all the time because we've been redeemed for that?
Yeah, so no, it's a great question. I thou, you're equating I thou with redemption, right?
Right.
Right. Right? Is that your question, Keith?
Yeah, but once redeemed, then that lifts up the I it encounter as being of value.
As a catalyst or a conduit?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I hear you. I don't think that's what Buber teaches at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think you have to live in both states of I it and I thou.
Did you hear what was just said? That you have to live in both states of I it and I them, right? But let me see, Keith and everyone, if this next slide will help, small as it is, right? That revelation, the Sinai event didn't produce moral and cultic prescriptions of eternal and universal validity. That our laws and statutes can only be accepted as the embodiment of a real address by God to particular individuals, right? Now, that this view by necessity leads to ethical relativism, right? What's right for you may be wrong for me, right? So what do we do with that, right? The revelation of Torah, right, is the only truth, right? Buber would say no, right? That this narrative is not at all how we should be approaching or understanding, right? So, go ahead.
He's throwing out everything that civilization has been created to work with. He's saying, when you start saying what's right for you may not be right for me, you're asking for chaos to happen, because now who's going to make the decision? What is quote unquote right for you?
What are the guiding principles, right? Gil just asking, right? And right, I'm seeing from some of right the faces, right? What are the guiding principles, right? If not what we have been taught for so long, which is that it's the Torah, right? And then the rest of the laws, right? Right. What is it that makes for universalism versus particularism, right? Where do we go with that? Right. Is there a kind of ethical relativism, right? If it's a kind of what works for me doesn't work for you, or vice versa? How do we understand? Is there a unifying principle? Where? Oh, well, okay. We're not going there. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Now, how do you get around that? I don't know.
Right. So let me show you this next slide, because they hang together, right? So he rejected the validity and authoritative nature of Jewish law. But he was, right, you can see why he was not necessarily loved by all of his, kind of companions. He wrote and studied with Franz Rosenzweig. Some of us have studied his works before. who argued, Rosenzweig, that revelation doesn't yield knowledge of God's essence, right? All that God reveals in revelation is revelation, right, in and of itself. God reveals nothing but himself to man, right? So it goes back, Gil, to what you said earlier, right? It just is. It's not something that can be replicated, right? Or understood in a definitive way, right? But is in fact the revelation of God. And then we're going to get to, although apparently not tonight, we're going to get to, which is just fine with me. We're going to get to what Buber addresses. I'm actually going to, Stacey, I'll send you the slide if you need it. Okay. I'm going to stop for 1 second so that we can see one another, and we're going to pick up next week with what Buber has to say about Jewish law in particular. Is there an organizing system? And very interestingly, what he has to say about evil, pre-Holocaust, post-Holocaust, right? He's a contemporary thinker, right?
Right.
So how do we understand all of this in the context of how we relate to one another, right? And we know that is paramount for Buber. So let me take a pause there. I apologize, we started a couple minutes late, but let me take a pause there and see if you have any questions right now. Or any thoughts that you want to share.
I guess the one thought that I would share is that if you were able to stay in an I-thou relationship all the time, my gut feeling says that you'll walk away saying you're the Messiah.
Did you hear that?
What did he say?
No.
Say it again.
If you are able to stay in an I-thou relationship continuously, I get the feeling that you would start believing you were the Messiah.
If you were in an I-thou relationship, hold on, I just want to bring all your faces up so that we can see you. Why can't we see the, hold on 1 second. If you were, Gail, come over here and just repeat it so right, because if you're okay, are you okay to come over here? Okay. Just you repeat, hold on.
I was saying that if you stay in an I-thou relationship continuously, I believe you would think you're the new Messiah.
No.
No?
Why? Because an I-thou is this presence of God all the time.
I think the I-thou relationship is a relationship where you and God are, he's always above you. So
Then that's not an I-thou relationship then.
Why not?
Because an I-thou relationship is of two equals, not somebody who's above you. It's two equals.
I don't believe that.
But that is what Buber is saying.
But you can't stay in that.
What Buber is saying.
But you can't stay in it because I think the presence is so, somewhere along the way, you need to describe what just happened to you, and that throws you out of it. My gut feeling says if you never have to get to that point where you describe anything and you're just in this presence all the time, I could see you starting to believe that since you're at presence all the time, that you may be the Messiah because you've got this presence continuously.
I think what
And yet
Buber,
with that belief might put you right back into it.
It certainly would. It certainly would.
Yeah,
According to Buber, right?
Right.
According to Buber, it certainly would. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to give the drosh for today?
Josh.
Who wants to give the teaching for today? And we'll know that we're in a squarely it moment.
I'll take a risk.
Yeah, please.
Well, a line from E.E. Cummings had been occurring to me, and I don't know how if it's on target or not, but that he who pays attention to the syntax of things will never wholly kiss you.
That's it. That's it, right? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I don't think there's any place else to go from there. It's a perfect finish, Joyce. Perfect. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you,
Joyce.
Very
thank
good.
you, thank you. All right, friends, good to see all of you. Keep well. We'll pick up next week with, like I say, ideally Jewish law and Buber's take on evil, okay? And perhaps a couple, we'll see what else we have time for, okay? Thanks for learning together, everyone. Keep
Thank you,
well.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night, all.